What if I told you that the greatest robbery in human history wasn't pulled off by career criminals, wasn't planned in some dark underground basement, and didn't involve a single getaway car? What if I told you the people who did it were farmers, teachers, students, and factory workers, men who just 2 years earlier had never held a gun in their lives? And what if I told you that the stolen money, 2,280,000,000 francs, funded the liberation of an entire region of France, and that to this day, billions of those francs have never been found?
If you appreciate true Cold War history told in detail, subscribe now. We break down the moments that reshaped the world, one story at a time.
This is the story of the Neuvic train robbery, July 26, 1944, the single greatest heist in recorded history, and almost nobody outside of France has ever heard of it. Buckle in, because this story has everything: Nazi gold, double agents, a thunderstorm that almost destroyed the whole plan, and a missing sack of cash that people in the Dordogne are still whispering about 80 years later. Let's go back. Summer 1944. The war is turning. On June 6th, the Allies have stormed the beaches of Normandy. Hitler's grip on Western Europe is cracking. The German war machine, once seemingly unstoppable, is now being squeezed from the east by the Soviets and hammered from the west by the British and Americans. But here's the thing people forget. Knowing a regime is falling and actually making it fall are two very different things. In the summer of 1944, there are still hundreds of thousands of German troops occupying France. The Gestapo is still operating. The Milice, the French collaborationist police, arguably more feared than the Germans themselves, are still hunting down anyone who dares resist. People are still being dragged from their beds in the middle of the night, still being shot in fields, still disappearing into the camps. In the southwest of France, in a region called the Dordogne, the French resistance, the Maquis, is growing fast. After the D-Day landings, men who had previously been too afraid to act are now flooding into the forests and hills, desperate to play their part in the liberation of their country. In just weeks, the number of fighters swells dramatically. And that creates an enormous problem. Because men need food, they need shelter, they need weapons, medicine, communication equipment, they need money, lots of it. The commander of the French forces, General Koenig, operating from London, has already sent a message telling the Maquis to hold back, lay low, wait for more weapons to be dropped in, be patient. But the resistance fighters in the Dordogne have other ideas. Their leader is a man named André Gauchet, and André Gauchet has just received a piece of information so sensitive, so explosive, that if the Germans find out he has it, he's a dead man. He has been told, by a source deep inside the Vichy government, that sitting in the vaults of the Banque de France in the nearby city of Périgueux, there is between 8 and 10 billion francs in banknotes, French money, the wealth of a nation. And the German Kriegsmarine, the Nazi Navy, has issued orders for that money to be transported south, to Bordeaux, to the port, where it would be loaded onto ships, possibly submarines, and taken to Germany. Or, as some historians have speculated, used to fund a Nazi government in exile in South America. Either way, the money is leaving France, and Gauchet is going to make sure it doesn't. Now here is where you need to understand something critical about the Dordogne resistance in the summer of 1944. These are not Hollywood action heroes. These are not hardened military commandos with years of training. These are local men, ordinary men, men whose hands know the shape of a plow, not a rifle. Men who have spent the last 4 years living in the forests like ghosts, surviving on what they can requisition from farmers, leaving IOUs they could never actually pay. They are brave, spectacularly brave, but they are also broke, exhausted, and operating on borrowed time in a region still crawling with enemy forces. So when Gauchet hears about the money in Périgueux, he doesn't just see an opportunity to fund the resistance, he sees a chance to change the entire course of the war in the southwest of France. He starts making calls, quiet calls, careful calls, because one wrong word, one informant, one loose tongue, one milice spy in the right place, and every man involved is dead before dawn. The first person he brings in is a man named Jean Caillard, the prefect of the Dordogne department. Now, on paper, Caillard is a loyal official of the Vichy regime. He is supposed to be on the side of the collaborators, but Caillard is playing a dangerous double game. He has been quietly passing information to the resistance for months, and now he delivers the most valuable intelligence of the entire operation. He tells Gaucher the exact date, the exact train, the exact route. On July 26, 1944, a dedicated carriage, unmarked, heavily guarded, carrying 150 sacks of banknotes weighing 6 tons, will be attached to a civilian passenger train departing Périgueux station at 6:25 in the evening, headed southwest toward Bordeaux. 6 tons of cash. Gaucher has less than 24 hours to plan the greatest heist in history. And the clock is already ticking.
Here's a question that should keep you up at night. If you had 24 hours to plan an armed robbery, not of a corner store, not of a small bank, but of a moving train carrying 6 tons of cash, guarded by armed soldiers, passing through a region swarming with German patrols, where would you even start? This is the problem André Gaucher and his commanders sat down to solve on the night of July 25, 1944. One night, one chance, no rehearsal, no backup plan. And if they got it wrong, if the Germans spotted them too early, if someone talked, if the timing was even slightly off, they wouldn't just lose the money, they'd lose their lives. The first decision was location. You can't stop a moving train in the middle of a city. You can't do it on a stretch of track surrounded by German garrison posts. You need somewhere isolated, somewhere the noise of the operation won't carry, somewhere where, if things go sideways, your men have room to move. Gaucher and his commanders studied the route from Périgueux to Bordeaux. They needed a station that was far enough from major roads to limit the risk of German patrol vehicles rolling in. They needed somewhere they could bring vehicles to transport the money after the robbery, and they needed somewhere with enough physical cover, ditches, vineyards, buildings, to hide a large force of armed men. The answer was Neuvic-sur-l'Isle, a small, quiet station in the Dordogne countryside, the perfect ambush point. Now came the harder question. How many men? This wasn't a two-man smash and grab. 6 tons of cash, 150 sacks of banknotes don't move themselves. You need people to unload the carriage, carry the sacks, load them onto trucks, and hold the perimeter in case German forces respond. And you need to do it all fast. Every extra minute you spend at that station is a minute closer to catastrophe. Gaucher assembles a force of around 150 resistance fighters, drawn from several local Maquis groups. Among them is the Groupe Valmy, one of the most disciplined and battle-hardened units in the region. They gather, they brief, they plan. The station master at Neuvic is brought on side. This is crucial. He needs to know what's happening so he can help manage the station during the operation, and, critically, so he can keep station staff calm and quiet. Panic in the wrong place at the wrong moment could blow the whole thing. 2 lorries are sourced and prepared. These will carry the money away from the station after the robbery, north into the countryside, to a secret woodland rendezvous point 40 kilometers away, near a village called Cendrieux. And then there's the firepower question. Because make no mistake, the train is guarded. The Banque de France doesn't ship 6 tons of cash on trust alone. There are armed guards aboard that carriage. And while the resistance is not expecting a firefight, they need to be ready for one. A man named Dormoyer is tasked with setting up a Piat, a shoulder-fired anti-tank rocket launcher, at a key point near the station entrance. The Piat is their insurance policy. If a German armored vehicle shows up, Dormoyer will deal with it. Except there's a problem.
Dormoyer only has 3 missiles. 3. He walks up to one of the operation commanders, a man named Gondouin, and expresses his concern. 3 missiles, he says. That's not much if things go wrong. Gondouin looks at him, completely deadpan, and says, "If you can't head a tank at 100 yards with 2 missiles, why would you need a third?" It is, under the circumstances, the most French response imaginable. The fighters begin moving toward Neuvic in the early evening of July 26th. The group Valmy makes its way through the small town of Vergue, and here, in what is perhaps the most beautifully human detail of the entire story, they sing. As they drive through Vergue, as they head toward one of the most dangerous operations any of them have ever attempted, they sing La Marseillaise, the national anthem, their anthem, the song of a free France that at this moment in history does not yet exist. By 7 p.m., the fighters are in position. Some are hidden in a ditch along the railway track. Others are concealed in a vineyard behind the cargo hangar beside the station. The station master is managing his staff. The trucks are in place. And now they wait. Word has started spreading through the town because in a small French village in 1944, nothing stays secret long before. People are whispering. What's going on at the station? Who are all these men? Are they resistance? Are they soldiers? Rumors fly. Some say the Maquis are helping forced laborers escape transport to Germany. Others say the train is full of milices, the hated French collaborators, and the resistance has come to ambush them. Others look at the fighters in their khaki uniforms and assume it must be the regular French army. Nobody outside the operation knows the real answer. And then, at 7:36 p.m., the lookout signals pass down the line. The train is approaching. The moment of truth is here. 150 men hold their breath. Dormoyer keeps his hand near his Piat launcher. The station master prepares his face. And then, the train is late. Not by seconds, by minutes. Long, agonizing minutes in which 150 armed men are crouching in ditches and vineyards and shadows, praying they haven't been spotted. Every minute that passes is another minute for a patrol to drive by, another minute for a German spotter to notice something that doesn't look right, another minute for the whole thing to unravel. This, right here, is where the plan almost dies. At 7:38 p.m. on July 26, 1944, a train pulls into Neuvic-sur-l'Isle station. It is 2 minutes late. 2 minutes doesn't sound like much, but for 150 armed men crouching in ditches and vineyards in the fading summer light, surrounded by enemy territory, sweating in the heat, hearts hammering, those 2 minutes feel like a lifetime. And now, finally, the train is here. What happens in the next 60 minutes will become legend. Roland Klee, the commander of the Roland Group, the unit tasked with boarding the train, gives the signal. His men move fast, purposefully. They enter Neuvic station and immediately take control. Station workers are rounded up, held calmly but firmly. Nobody is hurt. This is not a violent operation, not if everyone cooperates. The passengers aboard the train are given a simple instruction: stay in your seats, keep the doors and windows closed, and you will not be harmed. Most comply, because when 150 armed men appear out of nowhere in a small country station, you don't ask a lot of questions. Klee's men board the locomotive. The engine driver, upon seeing the resistance fighters, does something extraordinary. He grins and he points toward the front of the train. "First carriage," he says. He knows. He's been expecting them. Roland's men move to the unmarked carriage. Inside are the guards, armed and responsible for the safety of the cargo. They are disarmed quickly and efficiently. There is no firefight, no chaos. The guards, perhaps reading the room, 150 men, surrounded, outnumbered, do not resist. And there, inside the carriage, are the sacks, 150 of them, each one stuffed with banknotes, 6 tons of the wealth of France, destined for Nazi coffers, sitting right in front of them. Now comes the logistical challenge. The carriage is uncoupled from the rest of the train. Carefully, quietly, it is moved to a nearby shed, close to where the 2 lorries are waiting. The loading begins. 150 sacks, 6 tons of cash, passed hand to hand by resistance fighters who, just years earlier, were living ordinary civilian lives. Meanwhile, 2 men take up position in the station master's office. Their job is twofold: keep an eye on the staff and, in a move of almost absurd brilliance, get the station master to phone ahead to German railway authorities and tell them the train is running behind schedule. A delay, nothing unusual, nothing to worry about. The Germans are not alerted. The clock keeps ticking. The loading continues. And then something happens that no Hollywood scriptwriter would ever dare include because it would seem too ridiculous to be real. A representative of the Banque de France, an official of the institution that owns the money being actively stolen in front of his eyes, approaches one of the resistance officers and asks him to sign a receipt. A receipt for 2,280,000,000 francs, plus, and I want you to really savor this detail, an additional 1,500 francs to cover the value of the silk sacks the money is being carried in. The resistance officer signs the receipt because this is France, and even in the middle of the greatest robbery in history, the paperwork must be completed correctly. This moment, this single, magnificent, absurd moment, tells you everything you need to know about the spirit of this operation. It is not chaos. It is not brutality. It is organized, professional, almost bureaucratic. They are not stealing the money. They are requisitioning it for the liberation of France. By around 10 p.m., the loading is complete. The lorries are packed. The operation at the station is finished. The train, minus its special carriage, is sent on its way toward Bordeaux, carrying its passengers who have been sitting in shocked, baffled silence for the last hour. The convoy departs into the night. 2 lorries, 6 tons of cash, 40 kilometers to travel through the dark Dordogne countryside to the woodland hideout near Cendré. And then the sky opens up. A thunderstorm, sudden, violent, the kind that turns country roads into rivers in minutes, hits the convoy. Rain hammers the windshields. The roads become treacherous. And then disaster. One of the lorries breaks down. In the middle of nowhere, in the middle of a storm, in the middle of occupied France, with 3 billion francs in the back. The resistance fighters make an immediate decision: transfer everything, all 6 tons, onto the single remaining lorry. It's overloaded, it's moving slowly, but it moves. At 2 a.m., the lorry pulls into the woodland hideout near Cendré. The sacks are unloaded, counted, and 1 sack is missing. 15 million francs, gone. Somewhere in the storm, in the chaos of the transfer, 1 sack has disappeared. It is never officially found. For decades afterwards, in the villages of the Dordogne, every new shop, every new business, every unexplained prosperity is whispered about. That's resistance money. That's from the missing sack. The ghost of 15 million francs haunts the region to this day. But in that woodland clearing, in the early hours of July 27, 1944, nobody is worried about 1 missing sack, because they have done it. 2,280,000,000 francs, requisitioned from the Nazis, signed for officially by a Banque de France representative, delivered safely to the resistance. The greatest heist in history is complete. Now comes the hardest part.
What do you do with 6 tons of cash in the middle of a war? Here's what they don't tell you in the history books. After the greatest robbery in human history, after 150 ordinary Frenchmen pulled off the impossible, less than 35% of that money was ever formally accounted for. The rest? Billions of francs, scattered, hidden, disputed, argued over by politicians, historians, and former resistance fighters for decades. Some of it liberated France, some of it paid doctors and farmers and arms dealers, and some of it, a significant amount, simply disappeared. This is part 4, the aftermath, the mystery, and the question that has never been fully answered. Where did the money go? Let's start with what we know. In the days immediately following the robbery, the resistance leadership faces an enormous practical challenge. You cannot keep 6 tons of cash in one place. That's not just logistically difficult, it's suicidal. If the Germans or the Gestapo discover the location of the money, they don't just take it back, they use it to track down the entire resistance network. Every name connected to the operation becomes a target. So the decision is made: disperse it widely, quickly. The money is divided and sent across the region to maquis groups in the Dordogne, the Limousin, and beyond, even reaching as far as the resistance networks around Bordeaux and Lyon. It is used to pay off debts, the months of IOUs that local farmers and shopkeepers have been accepting in exchange for food, shelter, and silence. It is used to buy weapons, medicine, communication equipment. It pays the salaries of fighters who until now have been working on pure patriotism and an empty stomach. In the following days and weeks, the Dordogne resistance is transformed, funded, armed, energized. And the results are swift and devastating for the German occupiers. Within 1 month of the Neuvic robbery, every German soldier has fled the Dordogne. Let that sink in. 1 month, 1 operation. The money from that train doesn't just fund the resistance, it accelerates the entire liberation of southwest France. Communities that had been living under occupation for 4 years suddenly breathe free air again. The Nazi flag comes down, the tricolor goes up. Within a month of the robbery, the broader liberation of France is in full swing. Paris is freed on August 25th. The Germans are in full retreat across the country. The Neuvic robbery doesn't just fund a heist, it helps tip the scales of history in the southwest of France. But now, let's talk about the money that didn't go to the war effort, because this is where the story gets complicated and uncomfortable and fascinating. After the liberation, the French government wants its money back, naturally, and so begins a long, tangled, often murky process of accounting for what happened to 2.28 billion francs. The picture that emerges is incomplete, to say the least. A 1952 French government inquiry, the Rapport Clapier, finds that most of the money can be accounted for, but accounted for is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. By 1945, the French state has recovered just 35% of the total, which means that 65%, roughly 1.5 billion francs, remains unaccounted for. The official explanation is that it was spent on the war effort, distributed to resistance groups, paid to suppliers, used in operations that, by their very nature, were secretive and undocumented. That's almost certainly true for most of it, but not all of it. One of the most controversial figures in the aftermath is a man named Colonel Georges Gangouin, a communist resistance commander who helped distribute a significant portion of the funds to maquis groups in the Limousin region. After the war, Gangouin is celebrated, elected mayor, showered with medals, his portrait hung in the council chamber. And then, his own communist party turns on him. Party officials accuse Gangouin of hoarding vast sums of money from the Neuvic money in secret accounts, using the funds for party purposes without authorization. Gangouin denies it. His account? He admits the money was used for a fraternal association of former maquis fighters, for publishing historical documents, for buying properties for the movement. None of that necessarily sounds criminal, but none of it is exactly transparent either. The accusations fly, reports are compiled, and then, quietly, inexplicably, many of those reports go missing. The paper trail ends, the money stays missing. And then there is the missing sack, the one lost in the thunderstorm on the night of the robbery. 15 million francs, never officially found. In the villages of the Dordogne, the legend of the missing sack never dies. Every generation inherits the whispers. When someone opens a new business and they seem just a little too prosperous, people raise an eyebrow. When an old farmhouse is renovated and the owner can't quite explain where the money came from, people nod knowingly. That's resistance money. And maybe, just maybe, some of it is. Here is what we're left with. On July 26, 1944, 150 ordinary Frenchmen, farmers, teachers, factory workers, students, executed the greatest robbery in human history. They stole 2.28 billion francs from the Nazis. They signed a receipt. They lost one sack in the thunderstorm. They dispersed the rest across a network of underground fighters, and within a month, the Dordogne was free. Not one of the men involved did it for personal gain. Not one walked away rich. The French government's own post-war inquiry confirmed it. The fighters of the Neuvic operation did not pocket a single franc for themselves. They did it for France. And then, France spent the next several decades arguing about what happened to the money. Jean Collard, the prefect who tipped off the resistance, who gave them the date and the time and the train, was dismissed from his post in September 1944. He was quickly reinstated. The full story of his role was buried in files that were never released. Many of those files are still missing. The Banque de France representative who asked for the signed receipt, history doesn't record what happened to him. The receipt itself exists in French archives, a single sheet of paper signed by a resistance officer acknowledging custody of 2,280 million francs. And the money? The 65% that was never formally accounted for? It is still out there, in the historical record, in the whispers of the Dordogne, in the gaps between official reports and documented transactions. The British Great Train Robbery of 1963 stole the equivalent of about 45 million euros in today's money. It is called the greatest robbery in British history. The Neuvic resistance robbery? In today's money, over 400 million euros, over 8 times larger. Carried out not by hardened criminals, but by men who had spent the previous 4 years hiding in forests, singing La Marseillaise, and waiting for the moment to act. No heist film has ever come close to this story. No Hollywood script has ever been written. And until now, almost nobody outside of France knows it happened. 150 ordinary men, one night, 6 tons of cash, a signed receipt, a missing sack, and a question that echoes across 80 years of history. Where did the money go? Maybe some questions are better left unanswered.